It's Monday after the Shark Grand Prix de France and round 7 of 2022 MotoGP. The World Championship has been beasted for a third time. The Fernandez name is winning in Moto2 again, and there just had to be a splash of rain in Le Mans to spice things up in Moto3. Like a particularly strong buffeting from a Ducati, the Paddock Pass podcast is back to chop up and chew some of the subjects from France. My name is Adam Wheeler. I edit and write for the webzine ontrackoffroad.com and suffer as a Queen's Park Rangers supporter. And it's my great pleasure to be joined by the irrepressible force behind motomatters.com, Mr. David Emmett, and the bass-heavy growl of Moto2 and Moto3 international TV feed commentator and one of the most eloquent writers in the MotoGP media centre, Monsieur Neil Morrison. Hello, chaps.
Hello. Speaking of being a football supporter, I think Neil's got the better of it just at the moment, has he not?
A better deal, exactly. Yeah, I'm surprised I still have a voice after all the screaming that I did. Actually watched the Cup final standing outside a fast food place in Le Mans on Saturday night, penalty shootout. I was watching it over the shoulder of a delivery driver who had it streaming on his phone. And I thought, this is very 2022.
Did you jump on his back excitedly when you won?
We high-fived, yeah. It was a really personal moment.
Okay, we should point out this is the FA Cup final, the oldest footballing cup competition in the world, actually, and Liverpool FC have won. So try not to look too smug for the duration of this podcast, Neil, because we are recording on video.
Yeah, it's not like in the old days where you used to have to stand outside of a TV, outside of a Dixon's or whatever, and staring at the rows and rows and rows of televisions which were showing the same program.
Or the old days of teletext, Dave.
Oh, teletext. We've still got teletext in Holland, and honestly, I absolutely love it. I'm a big teletext fan.
I would never have guessed. We're backed gratefully by Fly Racing, of course, a big company in off-road with a fantastic crash helmet called the Formula that I'll actually be wearing to try the new Starkvarg electric bike this week. They also have plenty of garments like jackets, gloves, riding pants, protection, and other apparel for the street. So have a quick look at flyracing.com to get tempted. We have excellent support as well from Rental Street, another prolific off-road firm that produce top quality road bike parts. Don't believe us? Then trust the feeling and feats of Kawasaki Racing Team in World Superbike, because the team have won just a few races over the last couple of years. First up, gents, before we get tucked into this Paddock Pass podcast, the latest edition, what were your moments from the Grand Prix of France? I'll go to you first, Dave.
I mean, my moment of the weekend, there was an absolutely fantastic shot by, I don't know if it was by a video camera of Pecco Bagnaya's lonely trudge back down pit lane after crashing to record a mile. It sort of said it all. He was having such a fantastic race, and then Bastianini got past him, and then half a lap later, the front goes at that turn 13, 14, where everyone crashes basically. And that picture of it, that image of him just sort of, walking completely alone down pit lane, no one else around, no one else in shot, was, for a start, it was fantastic to see, but it told such a story of what looked like being a promising way can go horribly wrong.
It was a brilliant shot, but I thought, why was he walking the wrong way? I mean, he looked like he was coming the wrong way down the pit lane. Yeah,
because he crashed at the final turn. Well, the turn 13, I guess.
Yeah, so then he could have walked in the pit lane. And the camera angle was from the other side. He was walking down the left of the garages like he crashed at turn 2.
Maybe he must have been given an extra lap for as a punishment.
He was probably trying to spend as long as possible outside the factory Ducati garage as he could.
Neil, what stood out for you from Le Mans? Because, Dave and I were working the Grand Prix from home on account of both of us traveling shortly to Mugello for the next round. And you were there, in the media center with that horrible din, from the pit lane, basically the building next to the Le Mans straight. It just seems to reverberate all the noise around. It's deafening. What was your moment of the weekend?
Well, I hope you're going to let me off with this ad, but I actually have two moments of the weekend. One is a personal experience, and one is actually something that happened on track. Personal experience was just coming into the track on Sunday morning. was getting a ride in with our beloved colleague Cormac Ryan Meenan, and he strangely insisted on setting off at 7 a.m. So it's fair to say that I wasn't in the best mood whenever we got to the track at about 7:15. However, whenever we arrived and we were parking up, seeing just the kind of the line of fans that were standing around, and the outside and the inside of Shimano Booth, that sort of back straight that comes down from Garage Fair, it was absolutely full, and it was just after 7 a.m. So that was kind of the feeling that you got from the whole entire weekend, which is pretty cool. I think 110,000 was the official number of the attendance on Sunday. I'm not sure if we can put so much trust into these exact figures, but I mean, yeah, it was definitely the best attended MotoGP race that I've been to for quite some time.
What I would like to know is, did Cormac actually punch a security guard or try to run them over? Because that's usually what happens at least once a weekend.
Yeah, especially in France. He was on his best behavior this weekend. There was something very strange, something fishy was going on.
Why was he up at 7 a.m. trying to get into the track? Was that afraid of the crowd?
Yeah, well, there was a bit of a nightmare. The French security like to send you on the old diversion around the track, and it's not the easiest place to get into. So that was the thinking. But that was my off-track highlight. My on-track highlight was the Moto2 race. I mean, there wasn't really many highlights in MotoGP, to be fair, of what stood out. It was although it was quite a close race, there wasn't actually much action or much. There was quite a bit of incident, but in terms of overtaking, it was a similar story as Jerez. I'm sure we'll get into that a bit more as the pod goes on. So I'm going to go with the Moto2 race. Pedro Acosta's performance, I thought, was really quite interesting. He did seem to have cracked it in qualifying, and then led the first, I think, 10 laps of the race. Was shadowed by his teammate Augusto Fernandez, and I mean, those guys were really laying down at a very serious pace. And just as Pedro tried to crack Augusto, I think Augusto had eased off ever so slightly because he felt he was at his limit. And Pedro crashed out at La Chapelle. And I mean, it was the closest that he's been so far to cracking this Moto2 nut. It was tantalizingly close, but you felt that certainly in the way that he sort of conducted himself this weekend, the way he rode right the way through free practice, only his second ever pole position. Tempted to say that this was maybe his rival in the intermediate category.
Was it reminiscent also of maybe Raul Fernandez last year? I mean, you do have that dynamic as well of the rookie and the slightly more experienced campaigner like you had with Fernandez and Gardner. And it was eerily familiar watching the Red Bull KTM bikes just pull away from the rest of the field.
A little bit, yeah, exactly. Although Pedro crashed, so but he's been saying all the right things, and I think he does have the right structure around him to keep him sort of level-headed, not too down. But look, I don't think any old 17-year-old can get pole position in the 7th Moto2 race and lead half of the race before crashing out. But I still think it was a sign that Pedro's a coming.
Well, Raul crashed out a few times as well last year. But
yeah, it was also a little bit reminiscent of Marc Marquez, because he did the same thing when he moved up to Moto2. Sort of he crashed 2 or 3 times, was in a complete state, and then all of a sudden he sort of figured it out and started winning. So I think I mean, Acosta looked like he did in pre-season testing. I mean, when I was in Portimao, everyone was going, well, there's your 2022 Moto2 champion. And that sort of all fell apart a little bit in the first part of the season, but genuinely he just looked fantastic. And I don't think there's any shame in crashing out at of the lead at Le Mans. There were a lot of crashes, and look at the people who crashed. I mean, Paco Bagnaia crashed out a second. Joan Mir crashed out. There were a lot of very, very good riders who crashed out. So there's no shame in having done that. And I think. Personally, I think this is a watershed moment for Acosta, but we shall see.
Yeah, not too bad 7 rounds in. My kind of moment of the weekend really also involved Pecco Bagnaia, and it was the race winning overtake by Enea Bastianini, just going through turn 3, into turn 2 and then out turn 3. I thought the 2 Ducatis were fantastically close, and I was just struck by this thought that Bagnaia must have been looking at his old race bike from last year, wondering how sweet and how competitive that thing is looking, especially after his travail so earlier on in the season, trying to get the GP22 up to pace and how he feels with the bike. And Bastianini, I think he made 2 overtakes the whole race. Of course, he was. I don't want to say fortunate, but there were a couple of riders obviously who crashed out. From leading positions, Alex Rins, of course, Joan Mir, the Suzuki's, as we'll talk about later on. But it was just a moment there where I just thought the 2 Ducatis were so close, 2 Italians, maybe one rider who's going to end up, maybe teammates for next year, for all we know. And it was a decisive moment of the race. And it was also just a very close and exciting one as well.
It was an absolutely fantastic, genuinely fantastic overtake. It was done really, really well. And it also showed where Bastianini was so good, because you also saw him on his pass on Miller. What he did so well was get close and then just outbrake him. And it's so difficult to outbrake, especially around Le Mans. He would just seem to be able to find that little bit of extra stopping power, which was really very, very impressive. So, yeah, hats off to him. That was just an outstanding ride, outstanding pass.
Dave, would you describe the move as dreamy?
I wouldn't describe it as dreamy, but it was certainly impressive, and it was just really, really well put together. You could sort of see him building up to it. He took the same with Miller. He was taking laps to work it out, figure it out. He said afterwards, there was a few places where I was slower than Pecco, and I was following him, learning and where he was being faster, and he just sort of figured it out. And the way that he worked towards it, that kind of patience, having that kind of patience, again, we've talked about this a lot. Patience is such an important virtue for a motorcycle racer, and such a paradoxical virtue. But Bastianini really showed it. He waited until precisely the right time, and it was just very impressive.
Well, thank you for the superb breakdown, but you actually eroded my link, because I was going to move from the dreamy subject into the Fantasy League update. How are we doing, gentlemen? We've got almost 300 people in our Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League. I've slipped 18 positions from the top. I'm now on the second page of the standings, and it's a little traumatic. But then Joan Mir has really let me down in the last couple of GPs, and I'm keeping loyal to him. Slightly more loyal than Suzuki have been to him, and I'm keeping him in my team. But Joan really has to get back on some of the championship-esque kind of form, really, because he's not doing any favors to my team. And I think I'm something like 1,700 in the whole overall list of 47,000. So that's a little bit more respectable. Dave, how are you getting on?
Well, I'm on the second page as well, only it's something like the 22nd page. So I have actually gained some positions. I've got an A of Bastianini, but unfortunately I had him in whatever the silver team or the second team, whatever it is. I've made some very bad. I've still got Franco Morbidelli, for God's sake, but I can't get rid of him. It's really there's no one worth swapping him for. So it's been I made the mistake quite early on of swapping out Fabio Quartararo, and it's a decision that I have come to regret.
Neil, as you're a Liverpool fan, I'm afraid to ask this question. Are you actually sitting in the top 2 or 3 of the Fantasy League and just being very quiet about it?
The top 2 or 3, I think, of maybe the 72nd page of standings. I think you could say, yeah, I have all but given up hope of achieving any kind of glory in our Fantasy League, I'm afraid. Stupidly, was swayed by the way the wind blew at the end of pre-season, and therefore topped my team with KTMs and Hondas, thinking that they were going to do the damage this year. And look how that's turned out. So don't come to me looking for predictions.
So you've orientated your team around Taka Nakagami and Raul Fernandez.
Exactly. Yeah, those were my dark horses for this year, and look how I've been proved right. Well,
honest listeners, we do know a little bit about this sport. We try to pretend the best we can, but to anybody who's signed up for the league, it's good fun. Let us know if you're doing well, who you picked and why you picked. We always like to hear some comments or some feedback on social media, so let us know. But let's jump into our talking points from the Grand Prix. Neil, I want to come back to you first, because Ducati, again, just some really interesting potential movements going on there. But what was it that kind of, I don't want to say stood out for you, but what made you sort of think about the Italians from France?
Yes, I thought the kind of Ducati dilemma was one of the big takeaways of the French Grand Prix. obviously a lot of speculation, a lot of talk about who is going to fill the second seat in that factory team after this season. And, I think Ducati has long made it known that it's going to be, that it was going to be between either Bastianini, Jorge Martin, or Jack Miller. From what we've heard, it sounds like Jack Miller's out at the end of the year. And it's a straight up fight between Bastianini and Martin. I heard kind of prior to the weekend that the Ducati were certainly leaning heavily towards putting Martin in that seat. But just based on current form, I kind of find that they'll really have to recalibrate their thinking somewhat, because Bastianini is as Fabio Quartararo said, no one else has won more than one race. He's won 3 so far this year, and I think I saw Nacho Gonzalez, who writes for Motociclismo, the Spanish magazine. He wrote that any rider that's won at least 3 races in MotoGP, in the first 7 races of MotoGP history, when there hasn't been another rider that's only won, or that's won more than one, or that hasn't won more than one, sorry, then that person that's won 3 races has gone on to win the championship. So, I mean, history suggests that Bastianini is going to be a player right the way until the end of the year. I think it's certainly interesting. It's something for the Ducati bosses to chew over, and someone who shall remain nameless, that spoke to Paolo Ciabatti on Sunday, asked about Bastianini. They noted how Ciabatti didn't really look that happy that Bastianini had won. So that does also make you wonder what exactly has been going on behind the scenes. Has Martin been decided? Did they choose him? And are they now thinking we're in a really difficult situation here? So yeah, I think this is quite interesting, how Ducati are going to deal with this, because there's only one decision if you're going off recent form.
I mean, pure speculation, of course, but do you think Jorge Martin's stock has fallen slightly? Maybe they're looking at him on the GP22 thinking he clearly hasn't got a handle on the motorcycle. I mean, 5 crashes now this season. And in France, he was complaining of something like a trapped nerve in his hand. He didn't quite have feeling. It was in the right hand or his left. I can't remember which one he said. But, it contributed directly to his crash in his latest DNF. He was the boy wonder, wasn't he? He was the hotshot talent in MotoGP, but has he been eclipsed by Bastianini? And what kind of rider, apart from results, would the factory Ducati team want next to a poster boy like Pecco Bagnaia? I mean, do you just slide Bastianini in there purely on the case of his results, or do you think there is some way that this guy, this 23-year-old, could become somebody to sort of idolize in MotoGP?
I mean, I think that it's tricky. It is very tricky. Again, Jorge Martin had a fantastic rookie year, again with some ups and downs, but he did have a fantastic rookie year. And the second year is often it's more difficult because the expectations are much higher. So there's much more pressure on you. There's a lot less pressure on you in your rookie year. Wherever if you have a really good result, that's outstanding. If you get on a podium, that's amazing. If you win races, it's even more amazing. But also, if you finish 17th, then it's a bit disappointing, but that's just the way it is. It's no big deal. In your second year, you are expected to perform all of the time, and that's what Martin is not doing. Bastianini looks more polished, but then again, I also think he's not on a factory bike. He is in a genuine private satellite team. The Gresini team is very much you would probably even say the 4th Ducati team. It's the bottom rung of the Ducati teams, even though, saying that, there's not that much difference between them. They've still got an enormous amount of support, but he is very much sort of, he's not expected to do anything. So again, he's in a situation where there's no pressure on him. And the thing is, you never know how it changes in once you get into the factory team, precisely because the pressure is just completely off the scale. It's a completely different order. Also, just because of all the garbage you have to do, you get there's lots of benefits. So, there is someone organizes a car to pick you up from your home and drives you to the airport and sticks you on a private jet and They pick you up from the airport, and everything's taken care of from you. There's, you don't have to think about all of these things. You don't have to think about, or even lots of appointments and all the rest of it. But an Italian riding for Ducati in the Ducati factory team, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of media stuff. There's lots and lots of stuff going on. They make you work for your money.
It sounds like Moto Matters travel plans there, Dave. Someone picking you up and taking you towards a private jet. I think that's an interesting point. And if you look at Bastianini's history, I mean, obviously he's a lot more polished as a rider, as a person now than he was back in his Moto3 days. But you think back to then and the year he had with the Estrella Galicia team in Moto3. I know that is a Honda team, but that was going to basically a team where he was expected to fight for the championship in a sort of non-familiar environment. And, he didn't cope very well with it. In this current setup, a nice Italian team with lots of friendly faces. As Dave says, the pressure isn't too high. He's already on, a more sorted machine in GP22. That is a lot less pressure than when you're in the factory team. I mean, I think Bagnaglia's crash on Sunday, and in his words after the crash, really indicated the kind of pressure that you're under when you're in the factory team and you're expected to fight for the championship. I mean, it has to take an absolutely bulletproof rider in the mentality department to kind of deal with that pressure. So, it's difficult to know exactly how Bastianini would deal with it. But I do think one thing that sort of is currently in his favor and might be in his favor if he did move to the factory squad, his crew chief and his electronic engineer, Alberto Geribola, Dario Massarin. I mean, those are guys that were with Dovizioso in the factory team for years. And basically, Dovizioso said a few rounds ago that those guys are pretty integral to the success that Bastianini is having at the moment because they're two of the best in the business. And they obviously know how a factory team works, and you feel that they would be able to prepare an air for what he would be in for. Also, Carlo Pernat told me, and his personal manager, he told me at the start of the year, he thinks that Basti would be better off staying in Gresini in 2023 rather than moving up. He thinks that just that the atmosphere in the current setup it kind of works well to his needs. So it's interesting. I quite enjoyed also, don't know about you guys, but Enea's spikiness after the press conference on Sunday. I mean, he's such a relaxed, chilled guy. Rare that he sort of says something which has a bit of bite to it. But, he was basically gobbing off at Bagnaia for saying that he would prefer Miller to stay as his teammate next year. And he kind of came up with the line that maybe he's saying that because he would be a bit worried by what Martin and what I could do and alongside him. So I like that little bit of needle. There's not nearly enough of that in MotoGP at the moment. And I feel we have the responsibility to build this up into a massive heated rivalry in the coming races as gentlemen of the Fourth Estate.
Blow it out of all proportion.
Yes, that's right. Extra juice. But I mean, I'm sure Dave wouldn't mind a bit of spikiness as long as he's wearing those large Italian-style sunglasses that the riders seem to favour these days, and of which, Dave, I know you're a particular fan. But Bastianini, Neil, perhaps hasn't had quite as much of a taste of the political landscape that involves coming, like, Dave was mentioning earlier with as a factory rider. That's something else to consider. He has got Pernat's, advice and experience, of course, of how to handle all of that. But a question for you both, assuming, say, that Jorge Martin isn't already locked in and it isn't already done, could you even, if you were Chibati, would you even start some conversations with Paco Sanchez about Joan Mir? Paco Sanchez, Neil, you sent us a recording of some talk that he was having with the journalists in Le Mans. He admitted that, Joan was not asking for any more money than he was asking for Suzuki for a contract renewal. So, he's not going to be horrendously priced. He's not in the Fabio Quartararo level of demand when it comes to salary. He would be a better fit on the Desmos Adichie compared to, say, Alex Rins, who would be like a natural born Yamaha rider, you'd say. So would you plump for Mir? I mean, or do you think Ducati have an obligation to promote or at least reward, their big stable of riders?
I mean, Ducati's history has always been incredible. Well, I mean, they have nurtured internal talent, they really put a lot of effort into it. But they're also perfectly willing to be mercenary. I mean, they hired Jorge Lorenzo, and then they got rid of Jorge Lorenzo, which is another side of Ducati, the side of the pressure, which we've talked about. The fact that I mean, someone who knows Ducati quite well told me that the atmosphere inside Ducati is that we win together, but you, as a rider, you lost that race. So it's very different. It's a very, very different atmosphere, and it's the kind of pressure you really have to be able to cope with. Some riders also are better inside of satellite teams than factory teams, I think. But I mean, if I am Ducati, absolutely, you talk to Joan Mir. Obviously, you talk to Joan Mir. I mean, he's a world champion. Everyone should be talking to Joan Mir because you don't know what's going to happen. Do you choose him over Jorge Martin? At this point, definitely. Do you choose him over Enea Bastianini? I don't know. I really don't know. But Jack Miller is being absolutely rock solid at the moment, and he's looking like a very good choice as a second rider in a factory team, which he very much would be, a second rider rather than having two riders to challenge for the championship.
Agree with Dave for a change. That Jack Miller, I think, is doing a pretty good job. I know that the crash in Portimao was not his finest moment and pretty frustrating. For everyone watching, I think, as well as for the riders involved. But aside from that, I know he had an awful race in Argentina, and there have been some when it's been bad. It's been really bad, but generally, I think he's the best placed of the GP22s in the championship. There's been no moments where you felt that he's kind of lost his head. Like Bagnaia has just been so up and down. And to listen to him on Sunday after the race, I mean, I admired his sincerity, but he wasn't talking like a guy that's going to go and win the championship at the end of this year. He was being pretty hard on himself, and I guess you have to be hard on yourself, if you want to be champion. But it wasn't the kind of performance which made me think that Bagnaia is going to win the championship this year. Miller is an able deputy. He's proven that he can get a lot of podiums, maybe the occasional win during the year, and contribute to a harmonious atmosphere within the box. He almost knows his role, and he accepts that. I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. If you have the number one rider really delivering, the thing is, at the moment, Bagnaia maybe isn't delivering like Ducati expected, and therefore it might be worth taking a punt on someone like Bastianini in case Bagnaia's travails are prolonged.
Looking at Bastianini's results, though, sure, he's won 3 races, but he's also had an 8th and a 10th and an 11th and I think a DNF. But he has also been up and down. He hasn't been, which is where Miller has been much more sort of solid and reliable. That really matters. It's important to get results, as often as you can. Right now, I think Aleix Espargaro is looking one of the most solid riders in the, one of the most solid prospects for the championship, even maybe, just because he's been so consistent.
Well, we've been talking about number 1 riders and number 2 riders. Like the number 46 in MotoGP, we'll fade away for a quick ad break, but like Romano Fenati's career, we'll be right back for another go momentarily. Welcome back to the Paddock Pass podcast. We've been talking about rider changes for 2023, even, not 2022. That'd be a little bit ambitious. Guys, from the Moto2 race, one of the talking points that emerged for me was how close Cameron Beaubier came to his first podium finish in the class. And after Joe Roberts' win recently, I was just wondering how close we are getting to maybe seeing another American rider in MotoGP. Do we feel that the class is at the point where there's just too many riders, maybe not enough saddles, particularly after the development with Suzuki? Or do we think we're getting closer to the point where somebody like Beaubier is clearly getting better, clearly improving, Joe Roberts as well. He's kind of slowly maturing, but with not quite the consistency we expected. It's been a long time since Ben Spies was the last American rider to really generate any kind of hype or interest. And we've been saying for years that the category clearly needs an American in there. But honestly, do we think Cameron could be worthy of a space, or was somebody like the World Superbike champion be even ahead of him?
I mean, I think that it absolutely makes sense for Dorna to try and have an American in the Premier class. I think you look at the success that Formula One's been having in America recently, and that's been really well documented. I don't know if you've heard of the fact that the Miami GP was quite well attended and quite well watched around the world. I know you might have heard that news, Dave. But I mean, it makes absolute sense to have Cameron over there, or to have Cameron up there. Maybe he would be more suited to a MotoGP machine than a Moto2 bike after his history on superbike machinery. Whether it's going to happen or not, I'm not sure. I mean, there was an interesting statement from Carmelo Espeleta over the weekend, in which he said that Dorna is still trying to decide what to do in light of Suzuki's withdrawal, which will happen at the end of this year. He said that basically Dorna are not absolutely set on having 24 bikes on the grid. It could well be that Suzuki just disappear and maybe Dorna wait a year or 2 years before another manufacturer comes in, or before another independent team comes in. I mean, we have heard that, I think we mentioned last week's pod, Leopard are interested. American Racing are certainly interested, but I mean, being interested is one thing. Bringing together a sort of an operation to run a MotoGP team and hire the number of staff that you'll need, and then to bring sponsors on board that'll make sure you're a reliable presence in the Premier class for what I think 4 years it would be. I mean, that's a huge commitment. So I spoke to Itan Butbul over the weekend in France. He's the owner of American Racing, the American Racing team, and he's very keen, obviously, to step up to MotoGP. He's pretty convinced that the team would be able to bring on board a major sponsor that maybe comes from Silicon Valley, some kind of tech link. I've been told by some people in America that some tech pros are heavily invested in sort of bike racing and motorcycles generally. But would they invest a healthy sum in MotoGP? I mean, I don't know. That remains to be seen. So certainly the interest there, I think it makes sense from a commercial point of view. And plus, Bobier is a fine rider. It takes a whole lot to come into Moto2 like he's done and have a pretty tough learning year, and then become a guy that's featuring towards the front of races quite regularly this year. That's I think the third race in the last 4 or 5 that he's been sort of in podium contention. That he is a really strong rider. But I'm not sure if I see it, to be honest, Dad.
Dave, I mean, for you, is Bobier somebody even in the top 3 riders in Moto2 that would look for promotion out of the category to MotoGP? Or do you think, he's not there in that ranking, and his nationality would help him?
I mean, obviously his nationality would help. Dorna would love to have an American in MotoGP. I mean, I do rate him. I think he's a really good rider. And I also think he would be interesting. He'd probably struggle less on a MotoGP bike than he is on a Moto2 bike, because it's such a totally different discipline. He's raced superbikes for a long time, so he understands more about more powerful 1000cc machines. He'd have less to learn. That's different to him, deserving it on merit. I mean, who would you put ahead of him? Honestly, Moto2 right now, there aren't a lot of people who really stand out. Augusto Fernandez obviously had a fantastic race, but he's also struggled. Pedro Acosta has obviously got a lot of potential, but I don't think it would hurt Pedro Acosta to spend another season in Moto2. Again, who else? Aaron Canet is actually looking it's looking really good. He's looking very, very sorted and capable, and especially these last couple of races with the racing with a hand injury and still having that kind of success. I think that's been very impressive. So I think he would deserve a chance more, but he still hasn't. Well, he still hasn't won a race, and we still don't know what the bloody bow tie is all about. So I think until we find out what the bow tie is all about, he doesn't deserve to be to get promoted either. So yeah, I mean, it's a bit right now. The other thing is that Suzuki's withdrawal has thrown the rider market into complete turmoil. I mean, literally everything could happen now. Apart from, I mean, it looks like Fabio Quartararo is going to stay with Yamaha. Pecco Bagnaia is safe at Ducati, and Mark is safe at Honda, and then everything else you could just fill it in. Even though Franco Morbidelli has got a contract for next year, I don't think that means anything. Contracts always have performance clauses, and if I were to venture a guess, I would say that Morbidelli is very much underperforming his performance clause. So if Yamaha want to get rid of him, then they could. So yeah, I mean, anything could happen. Literally anything could happen. I think also my gut instinct is that there will be 22 bikes on the grid next year, in part because Dorna subsidised the independent teams. They subsidised the factories a little bit as well. But it would be cheaper for them to have 22 bikes on the grid rather than 24 bikes on the grid, and they're still reeling from the pandemic. They lost a lot of money during the pandemic, and they've done very well to, keep the show on the road. But it would be a good moment for them to save some money for a couple of years until someone is really ready to come back. And let's be honest, whether there's 24 bikes on the grid or 22 bikes on the grid doesn't make a great deal of difference.
Yeah, I still think we'll see 24, but I just think Dorna's position as a company that wants to create this sport brand entertainment product, would benefit from a more strategic approach. And let's be honest, the two probably leading lights in Moto2 this year have been Aaron Canet and maybe Tony Arbolino. So do you put two more exciting Spanish and an Italian rider into the Premier class? Or do you perhaps kind of influence a team or persuade a team to take a chance on like a Bobier or a Chantra, of course, who would be massive, like we were talking with our colleague last week, Akira, for the Southeast Asian market, having a Thai rider in there would be a major, major thing. So I just, like you say, Dave, I think the rider market is completely up in the air. There's a lot of people talking, there's a lot of chips being, thrown around. I just wonder if somebody in Moto2, specifically the Americans, might be able to profit.
Yeah, I think it's too. Well, I mean, at the moment, it's just literally just throwing darts at a dartboard, because there are so many variables and factors that I don't think you can say anything about, or there's nothing you can say for certain at this point. And I think by the time we get to the summer break, we'll know a lot more.
Speaking of pointy things being thrown around, Dave, one of the subjects getting hotter and hotter in MotoGP now is aerodynamic, packages, and how, overtaking is becoming, or the lack of it rather, is becoming a big issue. As we mentioned on the Paddock Pass podcast note show, people who want to sign up to our Patreon channel to hear some exclusive stuff from the track, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday evenings, we talk about what's going on. We mentioned that, this is something that is kind of been bubbling away for quite a while, but then now it's becoming more prominent. Riders are being asked about it, engineers and mechanics are being asked about it, and people are having quite firm opinions. Dave, can you just give a quick summary of what is going on in MotoGP at the moment, and should we be alarmed?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we've been talking a lot about front tire temperatures, but it's really difficult to talk about front tire temperatures without talking about aerodynamics. The problem is that overtaking in MotoGP right now is a lot harder than it was 2 years ago. I was actually just looking at the times from the race. The last time, this race was record-breaking for Michelin. This was the fastest They had the fastest pole lap, the fastest race lap, and the fastest race duration time. It was 15 seconds faster than 2018, and 15 seconds is a lot. The race lap record was half a second faster, and the pole lap record was nearly 3/4 of a second faster. These bikes have got a lot quicker in the last 4 or 5 years, and it's not coming from the engine, it's coming from the combination of the ride height devices and the aerodynamics. What is happening is the aerodynamics have two issues. They help with wheelie on corner exit, but they also help a lot in braking. So the fact is that your front wheel has a much better connection with the ground. The ride height device actually does something similar. Even though it's dropping the rear, it lowers the center of gravity of the bike, so that the whole of the thing is much more connected to the ground, and that allows you to brake better. And then when you're sitting behind someone, you lose that aerodynamic on your wings, so the front is a lot worse. You don't get the same feeling. You can't brake. You have to brake earlier, so you can never get close enough to actually try a pass. And then that's without the whole aerodynamics, that not enough air on taking air away from the front tire. And the fact that the bikes are getting so much quicker is also being seen in the tires. The tires are actually, especially the front tire, is under a lot more load, because you can brake harder, because the ride height device is it's getting more load because the aerodynamics. So it's just making it much more difficult to pass now because of all of these factors.
Dave, I saw you quite strongly give an opinion on Twitter that this stuff should be scrapped. Ride height devices, aerodynamics as well. Just to play devil's advocate, I'm going to stick my head above the parapet and say, but MotoGP is a prototype class. We need to be seeing the latest and greatest ideas and whatever else. Is there a percentage of you that agrees with that we should be seeing wacky, inventive stuff?
There is very much quite a large percentage that agrees with me. However, I would argue that actually, the reason that we're seeing the ride height devices and all these aerodynamics is because they took electronics away. They used to manage wheelie with electronics. They had very, very clever algorithms which would detect not when a wheelie was happening, but when a wheelie was about to start to happen. They had very, very clever electronics that understood how the tire was wearing and would adjust torque maps appropriately. That got taken away. The engineers had to find something else. What they found was ride height devices and aerodynamics. And so if you ban them, then what will happen is it'll take another 5 years, and Gigi Dall'Igna, probably, because it always seems to be Ducati, will come up with something really clever that I haven't thought of, because I'm not clever enough. None of us have thought of, because we're not clever enough. And in 5 years' time, in about 10 years' time, we'll be in the same situation, and we'll have to ban something else and give the engineers a new chance. Engineers, I used to be a software developer. I know how engineers think. They hate people putting obstacles in their way, and when you put an obstacle in the way of an engineer, the first thing they do is hack it, is find their way around it, and just to show you will not stop me. I will do exactly what I want to do. You've just made it more difficult for me, so now I'm going to do it even better. I
think you could have ended that sentence there, that engineers just hate people, Dave. Certainly in your case, anyway. But it is an interesting development. Some people have been likening the racing recently maybe to something that we saw in the 800cc era. The racing was chronically dull and boring from 2007 until 2011. Generally, there was the odd classic race, but pretty much your average MotoGP race in that time was really quite dull. On Sunday, we had the top five before Bagnaia crashed out, circulating within, I think, 2.5 seconds of each other. So we're nowhere near the kind of danger of 800 racing when everything was super spread out. The bikes were all really evenly matched, but it is quite frustrating when you have a race like Sunday, where the lead guys are pretty much all together, yet no one can really get close to do anything. I was sort of thinking about it after, speaking to the riders on Sunday evening. Arguably, it's only Ducati that has a bike where you can really overtake someone. I mean, all the riders from other manufacturers, maybe KTM, but even KTM, I don't think at the moment are in a position where they're super happy with how their bike brakes and enters the corner. So every other manufacturer, you had riders from Honda, Suzuki, Yamaha, Alice Spargo and Aprilia complaining about their front tire temperature going super high, not being close enough to attack. I think Andrea Dovizioso said something really fascinating on Thursday, where he said that because of the ride height devices, now the way the bikes are going into the corners, basically everyone can brake so hard that they're locking the front. So they're absolutely on the very, very limit of what is possible in braking zones. And, Bagnaia said about his race yesterday before he crashed, he was asked if the front was locking much before he had the crash. And he said, yeah, it was locking everywhere. So pretty much every braking zone, he's locking the front, which to mortals like you and I is just mind-blowing, absolutely crazy. But this is what these guys are doing every corner. So Luca Marini said it best, I think. He said, the only opportunity you have to overtake someone now in MotoGP is waiting behind someone to make a mistake. Because if they don't make a mistake, you're just going to be there. You can't get close enough because your tire pressure and then temperature goes up. Then the bike starts handling badly. It's not conducive to the show, really, and MotoGP is an entertainment product. And at the moment, I mean, we're not in total disaster zones or scary places just yet. But I think it's concerning, because the racing has been notably a bit duller in the last couple of weeks than it has been at any time since Spec Electronics and Michelin came in as the sole tire supplier.
I mean, it's been close, hasn't it, Neil? But, is there a danger that we're making too much of a ball of this thing? We're building up to be a bigger issue than it is. I know, for example, if we take the subject of rider controls, Fabio Quartararo very publicly recently said that, there's too much for a rider to do now with ride height devices. I mean, these contraptions are on the fringe of being banned. But if we look at overtaking, will MotoGP benefit from some sort of radical overhaul or some sort of homologation again that just dumbs down the series? The riders on the ground in France seem to have quite a strong opinion about this. Marc Marquez's comments were similar to Luca Marini. I mean, he was saying you really need a rider to make a mistake to make a pass. But, with the field being so bunched close together, it does tend to hide some of these problems, doesn't it? Whereas, say the 800 era, the field was more dispersed and it made it seem even more chronic.
I mean, you can't. The thing is, you can't force the issue. If you think of Marquez's some of the great battles that we've seen between Marquez and Dovi, between Marquez and Quartararo, the Marquez and Rossi, what's you've seen is people being able to force the issue. The Aero and the ride height devices have taken away that ability to force the issue because you can't get close enough because you just can't brake. The front tire temperature was less of an issue at Le Mans. There was still one or two. I think Aleix particularly was complaining about front tire temperature. But for example, Quartararo said, it wasn't tire temperature that was an issue for him. It was just that he couldn't outbrake anyone. He could never really get close enough. And when he was getting close enough, he was having to brake too early because he didn't have the braking performance. So there's so much. And also, it does seem that the Ducatis are particularly bad for creating this sort of like backwash to and dirty air and turbulence to stop people from, or to take away the advantage of other bikes. So I think yes, we are overreacting a little bit, but it's because we can see the writing on the wall. The wall is not, it's not bad. Like exactly as Neil said, it's not 800 levels yet. I don't think it will get to 800 levels, but it will. You can't continue like this, especially as we've just lost the biggest star in the history of the sport.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating subject, and it's something that's really molded MotoGP over the last couple of years. I mean, we can remember Danny Pedrosa talking about the original wings and how, it was having a real bearing for him, a rider of that stature on the start straights. So it's something that's really sort of building up quite nicely. And I do wonder what kind of rules are going to change over the next 6 months as we get towards the end of the season. But anyway, nobody's going to overtake us as we head into another small break, and we'll be back right after this for our winners and losers. Welcome back to the last section of this edition of the Paddock Pass podcast. We're going to move on to our winners and losers. Who is going to be champions and who is going to be the utter failures from the Grand Prix of France? I'm coming to you first, Neil. Who stood out? Who was your pièce de la résistance?
I would have to say, I know it's a bit of a strange choice, but I would say Brad Binder, because his sort of worth to KTM is kind of growing by the race weekend. Horrible weekend for KTM in France. Like, just so many of the bike's flaws basically were there for everyone to see. It sounds like they're having issues in braking. It sounds like they're having issues in turning. It sounds like they're having issues in accelerating. Nothing is really working on the RC16 at present. And whenever Brad Binder lost his wing, I think it was in a collision with Johan Zarco at turn 6, fairly early into the race, I thought, well, that's basically his race over, especially when you consider how Remy Gardner described the ordeal of trying to ride a MotoGP machine with one of your front winglets missing. But Binder still managed to bring it home in the top 10. And I found that quite remarkable on a day when, as I said, KTM had a really tough time. He was actually beating his teammate Miguel Oliveira before Oliveira crashed out with just one wing. And I mean, that's quite a remarkable performance. If it wasn't for Brad at the moment, KTM's situation would be even darker than it is, and it's pretty dark. So I think Brad has didn't quite save the day. I mean, you finished 8th. It's not exactly something to shout home about, but I think in the circumstances, it was a pretty fine ride.
Just as a random note, it is funny how many brands at the moment only have one rider. Fabio on the Yamaha, Mark on the Honda, although all of the Hondas sort of, finished together, and then
Aleix on the Aprilia.
I'm sure we'll talk about that later. They're stuck there with one rider who's capable of performing, and the rest are pretty much lost.
Now, I have to admit, to me, it sounds a little suspicious, because last week you picked KTM, I think, as the losers, and now suddenly you're picking them as the winners. So I think you passed by the new Red Bull hospitality and thought, I'll have some of that.
I picked Brad Binder as the winner, not KTM.
Okay, right.
Important difference here.
Despite KTM, rather than because of.
Yeah, where's my invitation to the Red Bull hospitality? What have I done?
Yeah, you're out. You've been outed. That's it. Not a KTM fan. Dave, your pick was Aleix Espargaro.
My pick was indeed Aleix Espargaro, but just because he's a genuine threat for the championship. He's doing everything that you need when you are challenging for a championship, which is putting in. He's on the podium every week. He's had 4 podiums so far. For the third week in a row, he was third. Now, he got a bit lucky. There were people who crashed out in front of him, but still. He didn't crash, and he ended up on the podium. He is, I think, 4 points behind Fabio Quartararo now. He's just looking really sorted. We know this happens. Things suddenly click. Riders win a race, or they get their first podium. They get their first wing, and things click. They stop doubting themselves, and so they do all of the things that they know that they can do. And Aleix really seems to be putting everything together. So, I don't think Aleix is going to win the championship, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did win the championship, and he's definitely going to be in the championship hunt all the way to the end of the year.
Just 2 quick things. Firstly, he was under immense pressure at the end of the race from Quartararo. Basically, the entire circuit was willing him on. and Aleix didn't put a foot wrong. So I think that was pretty impressive. That was intense pressure that he managed to withstand. And also these recent performances are coming amidst a pretty, I guess if you're Aleix, a pretty worrying contract impasse. I mean, he spoke again on Saturday at just how little development there has been with regards to talks between himself and Aprilia. Their initial offer, I think he found quite insulting. And he said, I don't think there's been another one. So each race he's getting more and more hurt by this. Yet, he's still pulling performances like he did on Sunday out of the hat. So, I mean, all credit to him. He is, I think, as Dave said, I mean, one of the only guys who's got a kind of a consistent level at the moment. There's not really anyone else in MotoGP that has that. Certainly consistent level, being on the podium more or less every weekend.
Yeah, I read a story on one of the Italian websites this morning about Aleix's negotiations, and it seems that what they wanted to do was take away some of his bonus and put it into his salary, sort of thing. Because I mean, obviously he's going to make loads of money with from bonuses. There's a lot of money in bonuses from the sponsors and also from your manufacturer. But it's nicer to have a base salary to be able to build on, to have that sort of security. So I think they are going to meet in the middle. They're going to find a solution. But it's quite peculiar that Aprilia haven't really realised how much they need him.
Also, fair play to him for wearing the shoulder cam. That's reappeared again as part of the Dorna's TV production, and it looks great as usual. I mean, it's still a novelty, so it definitely hasn't worn off yet. Guys, for me, I'm going to pick Jack Miller. You completely ruined my points, all the research that I've done, deep levels of research to prove that Jack Miller is my winner from the French Grand Prix. So thanks very much for that. But no, I will point out that this is actually Miller's second best start to a season in MotoGP. I mean, 2 podiums, 2 top 5s. He's made one mistake. I think he's had a mechanical problem. And I think just maybe it's I have the wrong perception of Jack Miller, but I believe his off-track profile just seems to be getting bigger and bigger in terms of his popularity, his conduct, the way that he seems to be incredibly open with his opinions, and also I just think it's the kind of behavior that will bring people into the sport. It makes him, he's a likable guy anyway, but it makes him seem even more likable. Some of his goon riding, I think, just at the with the marshals at the end, towards the end of the lap, on the cool down lap actually in France, was just typical, of that endearing kind of behavior that we like to see. So Miller for me was my winner from the Grand Prix weekend. And now on to the losers. Dave, who was your pick?
My pick is Suzuki. For a lot of reasons, obviously. I
wonder why, Dave.
And this is Suzuki Motor Corp and not the Suzuki X-Star MotoGP team. The team are actually doing really well. They had 2 competitive bikes. The riders were in really competitive positions until they crashed out. But they crashed out, and you could feel, it just felt like there was a sense of frustration, really a real sense of frustration at the whole sort of situation there. They deserve better. I think everyone would have liked to have seen at least one Suzuki on the podium, if not winning. It's going to be really interesting to see them at Mugello, because I think that track is going to really suit them. They've got the horsepower to actually go around there now. But yeah, it was a weekend to forget. Like I said, I think the riders, I think the team handled the whole situation extremely well, but it was a bit of a black mark on the history of the company.
Neil, Dave picked one Aprilia rider as his winner. You're picking the other one as your loser.
I am, yes. Maverick Vinales had a bit of a tough day. I mean, yes, it just wasn't a great time of it for Maverick. And we're 7 races into the season now. His teammate is second in the championship, and we're not really seeing any sort of discernible improvement or sign of improvement from Maverick. I guess you could take his debriefs from every Friday of every GP we've had this year, and they would be along the lines of, we've got the speed, we just need to qualify well, we're focused fully on doing that. Then Saturday, it's lamenting his poor qualifying. Then Sunday, it's, I talk all about if only I could qualify. But, you know, it's so much more than just if only I could qualify. Like, Maverick should know by now how to basically not get shuffled back. He was last at the end of first lap here. I mean, we've seen that several times with Maverick before on different manufacturers. I don't really share Dave's optimism that Maverick is going to come and be a bit of a force at some point this year. I think that, the same flaws remain, and it is what it is, as they say. Yeah, I think this could be it for the year.
But would you be surprised if he won a race? Because I mean,
yes,
like,
massively.
No, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he won a race and then he was sort of 23rd the next. That's the trouble. You can see, because you look at his pace, and every time you look at in FP4, you look at his pace, and it's really strong. It's up there with Alesius. But as you quite rightly point out, there's no point, because it all goes to waste, because he can't get a decent start. He can't ride in traffic. He can't overtake, or he can't find a way to get past people, and he can't qualify. So he always ends up sort of suffering. Even when he gets through to Q2, he ends up starting 12th. It's I actually find it quite frustrating, because you can see there's so much more potential, but you just can't put it together.
Yes, yeah. Yes. I've kind of, I went through that for about 5 years in the Yamaha time. Maybe this will be the weekend. If only this happens, this could be it. But I've sort of resigned myself to thinking that it might not actually come to pass. And occasionally he has the same pace as Aleix, Dave, in free practice. But there's a lot of times where he hasn't had the pace, and this was another weekend where he just didn't have the pace. If you're listening to Maverick, if he qualified well, that would solve everything. But I still don't think it's quite as simple as that.
Yeah, talk about the biggest enigma in MotoGP. But guys, what a crash helmet design. I mean, he busted out in Jerez, the Maverick kind of replica, and then used it again in Le Mans. I thought, fair play. It looks very cool.
I haven't seen it because it's a Top Gun thing, and Top Gun is an abomination and shouldn't be shown.
I agree with Dave. It is shit.
But the crash helmet looks good. Come on.
Oh, but I would like to see it, but I would probably see more of it if it was closer to the front in qualifying.
Oh, fair enough. Well, listen, my loser from the weekend really was just the growing amount of rumours and concern there is over the Grand Prix of Finland and the Kimi ring. Through MXGP contacts, I know that very, very little work has been done on the site. I think you can even see, Dave, you posted in our WhatsApp group the other day, there was some Google imagery. The track facility itself is very barren. I think they're still using temporary huts, the kind of cabins you see on building sites typically, to as a base of operations so far. Apparently the FIM and Dorna are going to be heading out there for an inspection this week. The FIM have already done a medical training course at the Kimi ring, just to get the Finnish Federation prepared for the Grand Prix. Apparently there's been a national promotion for ticket sales, which hasn't gone all that well from what I hear from sources inside Finland. I think when it comes to the MXGP race, which is happening later in the year in August, there might be time to get something of a semblance of an event ready. But at the moment, Finland, there's a lot of kind of concern over this race. I mean, riders were even being asked about it, and they were talking about it in the safety commission. And to be honest, if you are a MotoGP racer, as long as you've got a nice strip of asphalt and it's great to race around, then that's all you're going to be worried about, really. But let's be honest, in this day and age, and especially after the teething problems we found in Mandalika, I think the last thing the series needs is another hokey event where it calls into question the credibility of the series. And, maybe it's just another year too early to get to Kimi ring. So I hope there's some kind of decision, and it's a sensible one made before we get to Mugello and we know a little bit what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, this particular track has suffered in a number of ways. I mean, obviously the pandemic was bad, but then also the idea of this track was to allow a lot of Russian fans. It was basically to be a Russian GP without having to go to Russia. because it's quite close to St. Petersburg. Fans could have come over from Russia, from St. Petersburg, watched racing, and then gone back again. Obviously, the war has stopped that. The borders closed. There's no travel between Finland. Finland's just joined NATO, and so the whole thing is, or it hasn't joined NATO. They've expressed the wish to the desire to join NATO. So the whole thing has become, yes, it's become a lot more. It's become a lot more complicated. Also, it's almost like talking to some of the truck drivers. They say it's like a flyaway. Just getting there is so difficult because you have to take to get the freight there. You have to take ferries. You can't drive there; it's too far. When it first came up, I said, "Oh, that's great! I'll go up through Norway and then round and then down and go that way." And then I looked at it, and it was something like 4,500 kilometers, and I realised that that was a little bit optimistic to be doing in a week. But yeah, it's a very difficult situation. I think it would be for the best if it was postponed. But the trouble is, then the battle is who pays for this postponement, because obviously there are lots of penalty clauses in all such contracts, and the person basically who pulls the trigger is the person who pays the penalty, and neither side will want to pay the penalty.
So guys, a free weekend coming up. There's no MotoGP, there's no MXGP. I believe our erstwhile colleague Steve English is in Portugal for World Superbike, or then again he just could be fraternizing on a golf course again. So we'll hopefully have two shows coming up next week. One from Estoril. Steve and Gordo will be bringing the latest news and views from World Superbike, and then we're off next to the Gran Premio Oakley d'Italia, Mugello. Scene of the MotoGP top speed record. Does anybody know what that is?
I don't think it is anymore, because I thought it was broken at
Qatar.
Yeah.
Really? So you were saying that 362.4 kilometers an hour was broken in Qatar? I don't think it was.
You know what? I think it was broken in Qatar, and then it was broken again at Mugello.
No. It was broken. It was done in Qatar by Johan Zarco, and then Brad Binder equaled it in Mugello. 225 miles an hour. I asked you both a question. I'm glad you managed to deflect your lack of knowledge by doubting the credibility of my question.
We didn't expect you to actually look up the answer. We were expecting you to do it off the top of your head, so we could bluff our way through. But you showed us up to the frauds that we are.
Try to do some research. You just try to make an effort, and then you get shot down right at the end of the show. Listen, guys, we're going to speed off into the night. Thanks everyone for listening. Please send us any comments or suggestions. As always, we like to try and delve into some of your questions, and of course, any comments on how to possibly improve the show or stuff that you'd like to hear. We're long overdue some rental street sessions, some Q&As as well, so they will be coming up. And in the extra material, we'll be throwing onto our Patreon page. So again, thanks for listening to the Paddock Pass podcast, and we'll join you again next week.